So hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, How to Create Impact with User-Generated Video Content. Storytelling is a powerful tool in any learning environment, and when these stories come from peers, they can be especially influential in inspiring change and fostering new ideas. But to create lasting impact, we need more than just compelling content. We need to foster a learning culture that values authenticity, relatability, and community. And kind of in the age of AI, these elements are even more important. So how can we use technology not just to automate, but to humanize? How can we stimulate action and change behavior? So today we're going to explore these questions by looking at a particularly effective tool, user-generated video content. So user-generated video content, and Cal will keep me right here, or UGC, can bring context, value, and human connection into the learning environment. We'll examine why it's so powerful and which types of stories have the greatest impact on learners. We'll also share proven tactics for curating high-value content that resonates with your audience. So guiding us through this topic is our presenter, Carol Hodler. Carol is the founder and CCO of StoryTagger and a seasoned veteran in the fields of learning, games, and marketing. With over 25 years of experience and a BAFTA nomination to his name, Carol is a passionate advocate for user-generated video content as a means of bringing employee stories to life. So please join me, folks, in welcoming Carol.
Rob, thank you so much, and appreciate that comprehensive intro. I can just get rid of my first slide now because you've said it all. So I'm just going to skip to the next one, which is my clicker going to work? No, it's not today. So let's see if I can move forward. Right. So every designer needs a strategy for sharing work stories, and I don't think it really matters whether you're servicing an organization of 40 or 40,000 employees. It's really important to have a storytelling strategy so you can share real experiences, tacit knowledge, passion, advocacy, just information into the digital workspace. So as Rob mentioned, my name's Carl. I built a storytelling platform. I'm not going to talk too much about that today. I want to really focus on why stories matter and why I believe they have to be democratized, scaled, and prioritized in learning. And I've been helping employees share stories for over a decade now. And I used to do it with a video crew. But I'll talk a little bit more about why that didn't work so well later. But to start, I'm going to just go back to the 80s. Not exactly a DeLorean, but in the 80s, the 70-20-10 model came through. Now, the numbers, obviously, they're questionable. There's a lot of debate and discussion about it, but the principle is still accepted in that 20% of what we learn is collaborative. And back in the 80s, the workplace was very different. We were more likely to all work in the same space. So being able to share ideas and inspiration, workplace stories was a lot easier. And 40 years on, things have really changed. And even before the pandemic, before remote working, there was still flexible working, sort of outsourced production, organizations being more global in their scope. So there was less people working in physical spaces and less face-to-face collaboration. The shift from learning from face-to-face, classroom-based experiences into digital has been really enabled by some fantastic technology coming out, ignoring LXPs, LMSs, all the tools that have come out to support those experiences. We've, got communication tools that are really commonplace, like Slack, Trello, Teams. And they're very good for sharing that transactional information, helping people see perhaps what they need to do next, how they need to do it. But the water cooler conversations where we shared the why, why learning matters, talked about our career pathways, shining a light on problems that others potentially didn't appreciate existed, or to map out solutions to those problems, how they can be fixed and solved, got left behind. And that has been an emerging problem over the past decade. Now, just going back to the kind of pandemic, obviously that really accelerated and shone a light on some of the structural challenges that had been there for a number of years. So being more mindful, more strategic about using stories in the workplace is bringing that DNA back into the digital space that we very much kind of took for granted, really, when we all worked in the same physical spaces. And it's kind of not surprising that people didn't really notice that storytelling was getting left behind. It's a bit like oxygen. So you kind of get used to the decreasing amounts, but until you reach that point where your eyes go blurry, get kind of head is light, and you're kind of wondering what is going wrong. And those are the signs that something is missing, in that case oxygen. But there are also signs that storytelling is missing in your learning ecosystem, and they're not. It's all pretty obvious stuff, but a few clues are around people not really caring about learning or really necessarily recognizing the opportunities that you provide. They're not talking about this stuff. They're not aligning the value of learning with their own career journeys, what they're looking to accomplish in their roles. Another one is struggling to get beyond that 10 to 15% engagement. So you always get the super keen people always jumping in, but moving it beyond there is challenging. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Retention becoming a bigger problem, or not being able to really pin down, stop those retention numbers from increasing and start bringing them down. Again, because people aren't necessarily seeing progression opportunities, or they're not attaching the learning opportunities that you offer to their career development, advancement. Not understanding the relevance of learning to their specific role or the organization. So it's generic stuff that's not aligning with their own needs or expectations. Talent marketplaces struggling to get vacancies, line managers not turning up to leadership programs, struggling to demonstrate the impact that learning has to the business through the perspective view of employees. And also feeling like you have to be a marketing expert to kind of try and do this stuff, trying to create pull to learning by using marketing tactics to be able to achieve that, which is really hard. And so while digital has given us connection, the tools out there aren't necessarily making us feel connected on a human level. So we lose those senses of trust, relatability, empathy, inspiration, curiosity, belonging, all that really important stuff, again, that we take for granted, but when it's missing, it leaves a big gap. And as I say, it's been a problem for some time. It was a problem before COVID. It was a problem for organizations like Tesco in the United Kingdom, big supermarket chain, who had people working in lots of different stores across the country. It was a problem for the British Council, who had people working in different offices around the world. And so the pandemic has merely accelerated a challenge that had been slowly building for years. And it really is forgetting about that human side of work, the workplaces we used to share on a production line, over a water cooler, making a cup of tea in the kitchen. So as it's 2023, one of the questions we should probably look at is, why don't we just train a large language model to just train it on all the stuff that people have been chatting about on Teams and Slack and kind of wherever else conversations are happening, and digitize those water cooler experiences. But the problem is that stuff has not been digitized. It doesn't exist in a digital format. Those conversations where people are sharing informal or tacit knowledge, advice, advocacy, it doesn't exist. So those moments have been lost. There's no way that digital can get those back and feed them into a model and use that to create a chatbot that is going to support people. And AI shouldn't really be thought of as a tool to necessarily replace that experience of hearing from our co-workers. It's great to support, as I said, transactional information, but that human story where we need to really inspire and motivate people to do something different or to push themselves out of that comfort zone, that's not really where AI is able to help right now. It may be in the future, but right now, it's not. One of the reasons for that is around trust. And we've all seen trust really changing in our personal lives, how we relate to politics, people voicing opinions on social networks, a whole range of areas where trust has really shifted, primarily through access to better communication technology over the last decade. But circles and trust are changing at work as well. And just a quick question for you guys to drop into the chat. Where do you think trust sits with employees most at the moment, between CEO, their line manager, and co-workers? Just give you a second just to drop your answer into the chat, just where you think trust lies. Thank you, Brenda. Brenda is voting for co-workers. Asia to co-workers. Oh, guys, you've seen this before, haven't you? You've got it. Absolutely. Yeah, Vicky, it's absolutely right. And Edelman do a survey every year called the Trust Index, and they do a Trust in the Workplace Index, and they have seen that trust has been growing with the people that we feel most close and connected to in the workplace, whereas the more senior the leadership, the lower levels of trust. And they're actually dropping in senior leadership and growing in co-workers. And this really matters for L&D. And this goes back to the idea that you don't have to be an expert marketer to get people to change how they think about things or get them to open their minds to new ways of doing things. And we're going to rewind a little bit further with this model, which is the product adoption curve, which was developed in the 1950s. And as you can guess from the title, it's around product adoption in the consumer space. But Simon Sinek has been talking about this for quite a few years now, around leadership and change structures in enterprise. And if you need to inspire action in people, create change, adapt behaviors, you need trust. And this comes back to trust being most present between the people who we work with most closely. So to really make new things happen, to inspire people to be more self-directed about their learning, to make them think more strategically about their career progression, all the opportunities that are available in the sort of squiggly lines that exist across the complexities of our workplaces, you need to amplify the voices of those who've had those great experiences already, who your early majority, late majority feel closer to. And by amplifying those experiences, you start to make progress. So you're basically hearing, or your audience, your learners, your employees, they're hearing from people just ahead of them on this journey. And that's where trust really matters. And that's where trust really inspires action. And we used to be a marketing consultancy. Before we built StoryTagger, a long time ago, we used to be a marketing consulting organization, helping large companies build learning cultures, share the value of learning, all that really good stuff that's quite hard to do. And we discovered that storytelling was the most effective way of helping people share value. And it goes back to that model of someone just in front of me on the journey telling me why it's good, why it matters, how it's going to help me. There's so much trust baked into that. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we used to do it with the video crew. So travel around the country, capturing experiences from people, helping people share stories. There was an expectation back in those days that everything had to be Netflix quality, so 4K, sort of like internal comms quality of content. And it was slow, very, very expensive. It was complicated. It wasn't remotely democratic because it was very hard to reach people. And, it chewed up an awful lot of people's time. And social media really changed everything. It brought in a new way of people being able to share stories, and for how people could consume them. And it had the speed, it had authenticity, it had a democratization and efficiencies attached to it. But people aren't TikTokers at work. It's not a culture that is something that people are used to. It feels like there's a lot of risk attached to making content at work. We've got our reputations. We care about how people think and see of us. And most people are just worried about saying the wrong thing or thinking that people are going to pull them up on something that isn't potentially correct. So whilst a lot of teams have had success with people sharing quite informal things, and during lockdown it was a really interesting tactic for keeping teams feeling connected. So what were people making for lunch, and sort of quite informal style content that was very similar to what was being shared on social. But getting people to share work stories and talk about challenges they're facing in their roles, or sharing how they've been an innovator, is very hard without the interviewer. So having it in a self-service way, just telling people to record something without a coach, if you like, a facilitator guiding them through that reflective and storytelling process, is tough. And that's one of the reasons why it's not happening. Just very quickly before we move on, who's just a quick show of hands, who's tried asking people to share user-generated video in the workplace, getting to share either something that's quite informal or more work orientated questions? Just a quick kind of show of hands in the chat, and maybe just share a little anecdote about your experiences of doing that. I'll just give you a second to drop anything into the chat on that. It's always really interesting to hear where people are on this journey. I increasingly speak to teams. Like 5 years ago, when we first started StoryTagger, it was very rare for me to speak to a team who had actually experimented in user-generated content. I mean, obviously, because it's so popular, even like 5 years ago, back in our consumer lives, it was very rare for teams to have actually tried doing this in work. But it is becoming more and more commonplace. So I'll just leave you to drop any anecdotes into the chat, or whether you have done this before. And stories aren't just about the words, what's being spoken. It's just as much about how that message is conveyed that matters. Going back to the trust question, having a story try to encourage somebody to think differently about what a learning experience is going to do for them, their team, organization, customers, getting people to put themselves out of their comfort zone, bringing that full human experience to the story gives it so much more weight. And it's one of the reasons I just don't believe that artificial intelligence is going to be able to make much headway in this space soon. I just don't think it can replicate the connection, trust, and authenticity that is just hard baked into a human being sharing their experience, their passion, their advocacy for something. And I just want to share a short clip of YouTube storyteller Supermassive talking about why he also believes that technology really struggles to share great stories without having that human storytelling baked in. So I'm just going to play a video now. Hopefully the audio plays. If you can't hear the audio, just nudge me in the chat, and I'll give a little bit more of an explanation of what he's talking about. Here we go.
And then there's the face, which even now, 21 years after The Lord of the Rings and Andy Serkis, it is still so hard to do well. It's actually pretty easy to get face capture into Unreal using a mobile phone with the LiveLink app, and you can get a character basically talking like you.
It's game over.
The thing is, it just feels so disconnected and clunky. It's kind of like this. So I started playing around with MetaHumans last year, pushed and pulled and sculpted one that sort of looked like me, and then started using it as my avatar during live streams. But I kept coming up against this horrible reality, which was that the face of the character was basically unwatchable. It just wasn't nice to look at.
This is a bit of a joke or what? Like, what the f is this?
And it was really hard to get the performance to match what I was doing, so I just gave up.
So I think Supermassive really nails it there, in the fact that if you're trying to tell a story, if you're trying to bring people along with you, if you're trying to create that sense of connection, technology is a long way off still. So we still have to rely on real people sharing real stories about real experiences. Now, this is what our platform does. So I'm not going to talk too much about StoryTagger itself, but I will just very quickly share how it does this just on this one slide. So it starts off by basically replacing the interviewer. So it allows a learning designer to put together a framework of questions that are then passed on to employees. They then select the questions that they feel are most appropriate to their experience or they're most comfortable reflecting on, taking ownership of that storytelling process. And then the technology guides them through the recording of that and makes it very easy for them to share back to the learning team, where that story is ready edited and great to just be distributed straight away into kind of comms campaigns, into the LXP, LMS, or built into learning experiences itself. So the idea was to be able to really streamline that storytelling process and really democratize the ability for employees anywhere in your organization to contribute to learning experiences and building a culture around learning. So the last thing I want to chat through today is just giving you some ideas of, once you have that ability to be able to frictionlessly capture stories from people and use that and build it into learning experiences, where you can do that. And so there's some big topics here, but we'll dive into a couple of them. We'll start with culture. So kind of learning culture change. Most companies these days are looking to improve innovation, and that means encouraging, motivating self-directed learning. So the whole skills and thriving talent marketplaces, improving retention, attracting the best talent. And you can't build culture without stories. We discovered this years ago. Culture needs stories. It needs people to be able to model future behaviors that are being exposed to them through great stories and people they relate and connect to. And so some of the ways that teams are using StoryTagger to democratize and share stories, one of the really straightforward ones is why this course matters. It doesn't matter whether it's compliance or non-mandated. You just get people to share why it matters. So that could be your customer, stakeholder, sponsor, or it could be somebody who's been impacted by that learning on their job, talking about the personal journey that they went on from learning, and that dropped into the program or bookended on the content to show why this matters. It's stuff that people are desperate to know, especially with compliance training. Why does this matter? Why is this being put in front of me? Why do I have to dedicate 20 minutes of my busy time to do this program? Share the why. It really helps. Recommendations as well. So a story around a recommendation could be a line manager talking about how they've really struggled to have good one-to-ones. Those difficult conversations left them, feeling really miserable. They took it home with them and they discovered this program which would help them have better one-to-one conversations. They learned what they were doing wrong. They were able to improve that. And now it's just transformed their job, and they're much happier individual at work and at home as well. And that sort of story can be really transformational for helping people see the bigger picture around a learning experience. It's the sort of stuff that we'd have naturally just talked about when we were working in the same space, but doesn't really happen in distributed, disconnected workspaces anymore. Career stories. So career stories have been around forever, and they're typically text-based. They're quite long, and people talk about their journey in their role or roles as they've traveled through their career. But if you take a career story and transpose something like the hero's journey onto it, Disney, Pixar use that. It's the narrative about the struggle, failure, resilience. It's the journey to success. And the person telling that story is bringing their whole self to that. So you can feel the struggle, the challenges, the sense of impending failure and how they got over it in the whole way that they're sharing that story. That's proper career story. That's gritty. It connects people at different points of the journey. So somebody could be just on the point of giving up their own journey because it just suddenly starts feeling so hard. So hearing from somebody else, seeing somebody viscerally recounting that experience of when they were about to give up, but they pushed through, that's a really powerful way of connecting people and inspiring them to push themselves, a bit further out of their comfort zone, because they can, and there is benefit at the end of doing that. And change, again, it's another one where stories are critical. Most people hate change. They're really, really resistant to it. So thinking back to that diagram of the adoption curve, you really need to be sharing experiences from people just ahead of the people who are looking to encourage change within to help them do that. So a story about somebody saying, I thought this change was going to be terrible for all of these reasons. So you build connection and empathy through the story, but then somebody convinced me, whatever journey they went, to switch their attitude, think about things in a different context, and they tried it, and then all the good stuff that came back from that. So it's a transformation story. It's a journey story. And then lastly, diverse reflections, just being able to get people from all across your company, different levels in the organization, different community networks, just making sure that people feel really represented and included, making it feel as if it is something for everybody. And you can run some really interesting storytelling campaigns that make people feel connected with learning on all different levels. And this is where personalization can come in. So if you're able to capture stories at scale, you're able to give those connection points for people, whether they're a junior manager to a senior leader. They'll be able to find a story that they feel relates closest to them. So it's using the language, the nuance, the scenarios that they absolutely align with. And then somebody kind of, unfurling a new way of doing things or opening new ideas. So that's a little bit around culture and change. Before I go on to early careers and onboarding, I spotted that Asia mentioned being asked to create videos for learning purposes and then encourage subject matter experts to help out. But the answer is always the same: I don't have time, or I don't feel confident enough to speak in front of the camera. It's a really good point, that one, Asia. And I think when people say they don't have time, and I talk about this quite a lot, it's a slightly separate topic, but time is often a really good, I think we all do it a bit. If you've ever walked into a mall or a shopping center and someone comes over with a perfume or something like that and says, oh, do you want to try this? what do you say when they come over, just to stop that conversation dead and just give a really good reason that it's very difficult to argue with? It's time. I don't have time. Sorry. And you move on. And I think time, when people say time as a reason for not doing something, it's always really worth digging a little bit deeper just to make sure it is time that's the challenge. Because quite often, like you mentioned, people not having confidence to speak in front of a camera. Well, what's that mean as well? It's often more about people wanting to make sure that their reputation, their persona, how people perceive them in the organization is maintained and controlled in a way they feel comfortable with. So it's a really common challenge, but definitely one that is reasonably straightforward to overcome with the scaffolding and the support to help people to represent themselves in a really, really positive light, and also for them just to feel as if they are delivering great amounts of value to their colleagues, the team, organization. So thank you for sharing that, India. It's a really common story that I do hear a lot from teams. If it's any consolation, the other one I often hear is that when designers have actually managed to get content from subject experts or sponsors, stakeholders, whoever from an organization, the results have been quite disappointing as well. So doing it in quite an unstructured way, it often ends up in a ton of editing work, which designers feel obliged to do and release because their subject expert, whoever it was, has put a lot of effort, pushed themselves out of their comfort zone to produce it. So you feel duty bound to put that into a program, but at the expense of a huge amount of editing work to try and get it into shape can be used. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword if people do or they don't contribute. On early careers and onboarding, again, a lot of learning teams, early careers teams, grad teams look at this, and getting costs of recruitment down by minimizing retention problems is a really big win for all companies, and also with the need for innovation as well. If you've got innovation, you need to be retaining people. You need people to be really excited about the opportunities that are available at an organization. And so giving people more context and framing around what onboarding is going to feel like. There's a lot of content typically involved in an onboarding experience. There's a lot of transactional stuff that goes on in there. But being able to signpost people through that, use stories to improve those experiences and show why certain things are important to the business. So it's kind of context and framing to this stuff helps people navigate their way through what can be quite often is quite a considerable amount of content. Recruiters will have always pushed values. Values are so important in the recruitment process now, and organizational values are often something that recruiters really use as a lever to engage people with taking a role at your company. You have to really quickly show what this looks like excuse me, in real life, because quite often a lot of these values and experiences take a little while to come through into the work experience. So, that can be learning opportunities, diversity and inclusion. If people are working remotely or there is a lot of remote working going on, it will naturally just take a longer time for people to be exposed to those experiences. So by baking it into onboarding, by getting people to share stories about their lived experiences, it helps evidence the fact that the promises that have been made in the recruitment program actually do happen. So even as an individual, I might not experience it myself. I can see that people who I'm I feel naturally aligned to trust because they're on a similar level to where I am or just above me, are talking about their personal experiences of that. And I've got no reason to have anything other than complete trust in what they say. And another way of doing this is through day in the life stories. I actually think TikTok has done day in the life stories a real disservice because there's loads of them on TikTok, and it's typically about people eating and drinking or playing on a table football or something like that. It's all about the kind of complementary stuff around the outside, the periphery of a job, rather than the actual core experience of a role, because people feel they're not allowed to talk about that. It's something that they can't share or they don't know how to share. So by giving people a really strong structure and guidance on being able to share what really makes their work special, why they really love it so much, and the kind of exciting and inspirational things they do on a day-to-day basis, bringing that out to someone who's just starting is really inspirational. They'll recognize the format, but when you do it, the actual content and the experience and the impact of that will be much greater. Oh, do excuse me. I'm just going to have a drink of water before I go on to the last one, which is meeting other new starters. So again, if people are working remotely or there is remote working going on, so not everyone's in the office at the same time, just having that connection with other people who are in the same cohort as you coming in, or a prior cohort talking about their experiences, can be a really powerful way of creating that sense of connection. So the last one we're going to look at today is cohort-based learning, leadership development. I'm going to fly through this because my throat is getting quite tickly. So again, creating those connections, giving people introductions before they turn up. That's what people love cohort experiences for, making connections, networking. Just because something's digital, you don't have to take that away. You can do it asynchronously through people sharing stories. Showing what the session's going to be like, introducing the facilitator, warming people up, doing that asynchronously as well, keeping all of this stuff so people can just dip into it. It's not so appointment based for everything to do with a cohort session. It can be dipped in without compromising on the connection. And then teach backs, key insights, practice stories, people talking about their transformation journeys, all the really important stuff that cohort experiences need to bake in by helping people share reflective stories about what they've learned, what they're doing differently, is really vital way of bringing this stuff to life. So before my voice completely goes, in summary, learning experiences need context, give people an idea of what they are going to be learning and why it matters. Use this to inspire your early, late majority, bring people along, help them see why something matters from the voices of people who are just ahead of them in the journey. Oops, sorry. UGC video is an amazing format for this because it just brings the whole person to it. It's really authentic, connected, trusted. Become a storyteller. Don't be a marketeer. It's too complicated and hard these days, but storytelling is pretty straightforward, and it's the most powerful tool that we found for connecting with people and inspiring change. But you do need a smart tool to help you do it, because all the ways that we tried, you've tried to do it previously, haven't worked. So you do need to lean on technology to be able to pull those really brilliant stories through. Got a bunch of free resources that you can grab. If you go to that URL, or maybe my colleague Anita will drop that into the chat, you can get storytelling at work, an engagement guide about transforming your experts into inspiring creators. And there's also a story discovery tool where you can play with the business goals that I was sharing and see what stories you can start sharing as well. So I'm really happy to take any questions before we wrap up. I appreciate you're probably all busy eating your lunches and may need to get a bit of sunshine wherever you are in the world before we wrap up today. But if anyone has got any questions, I'd be really happy to spend a few minutes before we wrap up today answering those.
Yeah, I thought there'd be a question coming in from somewhere. I suppose I have one question, Cal, just while we're waiting. Do you get a sense that the more people do this, the more people appear on camera, the more comfortable they become over time? So I think that kind of initial hesitancy of a lot of learners is, this is completely new, I prefer to write. And I've had this in my work where I deal with people creating reflective accounts, that a lot of people say, I don't like writing, but they suddenly prefer writing to appearing on camera. But as soon as they've done it the first couple of times, they love it and they take to it. Is that been your kind of experience, or is that quite unusual?
It's giving people a structure. So it's giving people the confidence they're talking about the things that you need them to be talking about, and sharing it in a way that is only going to reinforce and boost their profile within the organization. So it's a lot about reputation. It's a lot about accuracy. It's about having the confidence to step up as an expert. It's something that it's a pretty level playing field as far as people struggling with the stuff across a business. So you can have senior leaders who struggle with stuff, right down to people working in customer service. So everybody needs help doing this. And I've been working with user generated content from really in kind of some of the early days of the content being used in consumer marketing. And the thing that I learned very quickly was people need to see the value in what they're creating. So they have to understand why producing, making, contributing is going to benefit other people. All of us are really open to helping others and putting ourselves out of our comfort zone if we know it's going to be supporting and assisting somebody else. So that value prop has to be baked into it, but also you've got to make it really easy for them as well. So it's got to be really simple, really quick, really supported. And the last thing is you've got to help them make something they're really proud of. They've got, because they're the final sign off of this stuff. If they don't like it, you will never see it. So they have to feel really good, really positive, feel that the value proposition that you shared is baked into what they've created, and that it was such an easy and straightforward process for them that they just got good feelings about it. And then that is when they will send it. So there's a bunch of stuff wrapped up in this. It's all very human. It's all things that you need to have a real empathy and understanding of your audience and bring them along with you. And that's what I really love about story curation. It is such an integrally human experience, and the joy that you get from seeing people having shared this stuff and seeing the results of them contributing a story about their work experience with the support that you've given them is an incredible feeling. So it kind of makes the learning the process of doing it. It's not rocket science. It's not difficult to do. It's definitely within every designer's capability to take a model, a workflow, go through that. But the rewards from it are incredible. So I'd highly recommend people looking into this as another tool in their content strategy for supporting and growing and building learning within their company.
Thank you very much. So folks, the floor is still open for questions for another minute or two. This is kind of your chance to clarify any points you'd like further information on. Remember, there are no silly questions. Each one contributes to the discussion, and if nobody comes up with a silly question, I will ask a silly question. I think you kind of stunned everybody into silence. I think it was such a brilliant webinar, Carl. Thanks so much for coming along and and contribute in that.
I do apologize for my voice breaking at the end as well.
Happens to me every time.
I've got
Every
the
time.
window shut because there's just so many dogs barking outside. It's one of the perils of home working.
Yeah.
So out in the outskirts of Brighton, everyone's got a dog. They're all barking for their dinner.
Yeah.
So I shut the window, so it's a bit dry in here.
So it's the way it works.
But
Always
there's no
happens
dogs
to me.
barking. Hopefully you can't hear them anyway.
No. Well, nobody's got any other questions. I just have one question that I kind of wanted to ask is do you see kind of, there's been a lot of talk about AI stepping in and people using this in terms of assessment, you know, to kind of write their kind of essays for them or write their reflective accounts for them. Do you think this will actually push a move into user-generated video being used much more instead of written work for assessment? Or do you think that having a portfolio of short videos and helping people create videos in this way would actually contribute towards assessment and be a better avenue than kind of written assessments?
It's a really good question, and the whole AI thing is very interesting at the moment because the way I see it, there's a lot of people claiming AI will do all sorts of wonderful things, and it will do all sorts of wonderful things. But I think there's a real line in the sand to some of the really kind of more tactile, human, kind of emotional experiences that are baked into learning. You know, it can't just all be kind of automated and have an avatar telling you what to do in a slightly lumpy voice. So the trust piece, the authenticity, the sense of connection, I think it's a huge risk to hand stuff over to AI that has been baked into how we learn, develop, and progress in the workplace for generations. And expect it to work. And to be honest, I found more interest has been generated in what we help people do with storytelling since technology has kind of progressed more, because I think people are now really valuing some of the human traits and the human experiences in the digital space potentially more than before. And I think it's a real balance. So AI will just do some things incredibly and do them really, really well. And we use it a lot, not so much in the platform, but kind of in our day-to-day work. But I think having a real person sharing a real story about a real work experience that really pushes the needle forward for other people to think about doing things differently. As long as humans are working, I can't see why that isn't something that they will really crave and need to connect with.
Oh, thank you very much. Carol, thanks for a fantastic presentation, and to everyone who joined us today. Remember, our recording of the webinar will be available soon if you want to go back over any of the points. Now, if you are watching this video at some point in the future, there are links below to more information and to details of how to connect with Carol and StoryTagger so you can follow their work. Please keep an eye on our events page for future webinars, and we're looking forward to seeing you again. So thank you for being with us today, and have a great day.